Welcome to another edition of the Dean Legge Show. We're going to talk about Georgia and Florida here immediately. This game has huge implications on the SEC East. The winner of the game, it's kind of hard to see how they don't win the conference, particularly the East, particularly if it's the Gators. So a monumental game for Georgia and Florida, both coming into this with a loss each. I am going to talk a little bit tonight about more about what Florida has had to say here of late. They had their media availability on on Monday. Today's Tuesday. And, a lot of complimentary things about Georgia. Florida said some dumb stuff the last couple of years, so they're slowing down that talk, which is probably a good move. But the first person I want to talk about at the beginning here is what Dan Mullen, Florida's head coach, had to say. Now, Dan Mullen, there's no question he's had a very successful run this first year and a half at Florida. But he had plenty to say this summer about the Dawgs. Whether he meant to or not, I don't know. It sure seemed like it. And he'll have to put up or shut up on Saturday. So here's what Dan Mullen had to say about Georgia coming into this critical test for the Gators this week.
Obviously excited, big game this week. A lot of fun to play in this game, great rivalry game. Florida, Georgia's kind of a fun game to be a part of. Great playing it in Jacksonville, which is just a really unique scene for college football. And a lot of fun. Obviously, great challenge. Georgia's one of the best teams in the country. Got offense that can put up a lot of points. They got I think the top defense in the league, and so very, very talented team at every position, front to back to front, and be a big challenge for our guys.
So everything on the line for the Dawgs and Gators this week, as usual. When you get to Jacksonville, of course, this is the first time. This is only the second time here lately that both of these teams have come into this game as ranked teams. I mean, I'm just going to go through it off the top of my head. In 2010 and 11, neither team was ranked coming into this game, which is very strange. 2012 produced a top 12 matchup with Georgia and Florida. The Dawgs knocking off it depends on the poll, but number 2 or 3 Gators. Georgia and Florida came into the game unranked in 13. In 14, Georgia was ranked and the Gators were not. In 15, the Gators were ranked and Georgia was not. 16, that was the same situation. 17, Georgia was ranked, I think, in the top 5. And the Gators were unranked in that blowout win for Georgia. And then last year it was a top 10 matchup, just like it is this year. So this is always a critical game nationally, typically, but it is hard in college football to always nail it if you're the teams. I mean, what I mean by that is, everyone's not always good. Even programs like, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, the traditional rivalries, Auburn, Alabama, you don't always get top 10 matchups. But this decade, Georgia and the Gators have had 3 of them. And if you go back to 2008, they've had 4 in the last 11 matchups. So that's a lot. I don't know how many, true rivalries, what I mean by that is traditional rivalries, that can really say that. Probably a few. Florida State back in the day, certainly not right now. So this is a unique experience. Obviously, if you've never been to Jacksonville for this game, there's I've never seen anything like this in college football. I've not been to Oklahoma, Texas, but I'm sure that's a different sort of feel than Georgia, Florida, which has a very beachy party atmosphere. Here's Florida quarterback Kyle Trask talking about his experience, what he's expecting in the game this weekend in Jacksonville.
I think it's a big game, not only for me, but for our team and where we're at in the season right now. And I think we're treating it as the biggest game of the season just because it's our next game, and we're going to do our best to just execute at a high level and play to our standard.
But when you're a backup, are you kind of looking around and seeing how crazy it is with half fans one team, half the other?
I mean, I think it's pretty cool how we do it, how we kind of split it right down the middle, and it's just us guys versus their guys. And, I think this is one of the most important games of the season as it comes to just tradition. I think it's really cool how this game is just played in Jacksonville every year. I think it's very good for both universities.
Kyle Trask is one of the reasons why Florida has done so well this year. I mean, he's put up almost 1,400 yards passing, 67.5% completion rate, 14 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions. He's played about as well as you could play for someone who is essentially was their number 3 guy coming into the season, or at least it certainly looked that way on the depth chart. So the Gators will probably use Emory Jones. They used him last year a little bit. He had one big ball, I remember. But it will be the Tao Trask show, a guy who doesn't have a lot of experience starting, but this season he's done very well. The one area, there's 2 areas for Florida on offense that are concerning if you look at things. Number one, they turn the ball over a fair amount. And someone was saying on Dog Post earlier today, the message board, that you should be going to dogpost.com, DAWGPOST.com, that, some of those turnovers were Felipe Frank's fault or and so forth. But, I mean, Trask has thrown a fair amount of interceptions himself over the season. I mean, 4 interceptions in only about 5 or 6 games. He didn't play at the beginning of the season because he wasn't the starting quarterback. So he's coughed it up. And, I mean, of course, the interceptions are one thing, but Florida fumbles quite a bit too, and they lose those fumbles. The other problem, they're giving up about, it's not quite 2 sacks a game, but it's something like that. I mean, they had 13 sacks in their season so far. That's not ideal. It's not the end of the world, but it does kind of jump out at you when you look at what Florida's giving up. I couldn't tell you how many sacks Georgia's got, but it doesn't seem like a real problem for Georgia. I don't know, maybe it's not for the Gators. The turnovers are, though. I mean, they've got, offensively, they've got almost, it's not quite double the amount of turnovers that Georgia does in this season. That's not what you want. Speaking of turnovers, getting turnovers and so forth, former Georgia defensive coordinator Todd Grantham is now the coordinator at Florida, as I'm sure everyone knows. He had quite a bit to say about Georgia's offensive guys, talking about the offensive line and how good they are. He called both Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift elite.
They, first of all, have a very physical offensive line. The running backs elite, and they really got a good stable of running backs that can find a seam, and it's pretty simple. Good runners run where you're not, and those guys can pick gaps and seams, and they can take a small hole and accelerate through it and make it a double-digit, gain that way. But their offense, it starts with their offensive line being physical. Quarterback does a good job. He's a really smart guy, so he can get them in the right, plays and all that kind of stuff. And then, it's like anything. Their team, they do a good job of blocking. Their wideouts do a good job of blocking. So, it's really a team effort for them to be successful running the ball, and they've done a good job with it.
You can rest assured that Todd is going to have a plan to pressure. That was something that is something he's always believed in. He has been a good coordinator for Florida for sure. You just look at their numbers. I mean, they have played well. Generally speaking, the statistics don't lie. They're not as good a defense as Georgia, but they're in that universe for sure. And, with the defensive linemen that the Gators have coming back, that's just another challenge for Georgia to deal with. If those guys don't play in this game, that's going to be tough. It's going to be that much tougher for Florida to win it. And, right now, and, you can only talk about this sort of stuff so much, but the betting line continues to go higher for Georgia. It's at 6.5, so it's back where it originally started at about 48 hours ago in this game. I think it could definitely go past 7 here soon. So once you get past 7, there's mathematical reasons why that seems to matter for bettors, because of things like teasers and so forth. So, like right now, you could still barely get, if you were doing a teaser, you could still get the Gators, at a half point or so. So that's something to monitor. I think anywhere from 7 to 10, 6.5, 7 to 10, Georgia is a favorite. I think is a normal number. That would make sense for it to be at. I think they should be favored in this game. I think win or lose, this 2-week period since the South Carolina loss has been a lot of hair, losing hair and sleep and so forth over, basically what were 4 turnovers and, a half against Kentucky that was just bad. The conditions were, horrible. And, of course, I always want to know what everyone thinks. But before you start talking about making excuses, when you explain that someone has had 4 turnovers, that's not making an excuse. It's an acknowledgement of the failure of Georgia's offense to protect the ball. If Florida is bad in terms of turnovers and they've got double the amount of Georgia's, almost double the amount of Georgia's, isn't it really bad to have 4 of your turnovers, exclusively 4 in just one game like Georgia's had? The Gators have had close to 4 in a couple of games. So that's a real issue that not just fumbled, they've turned it over 3 and 4 times, a couple of times. So that's a problem for Florida. And they've come in SEC games or Power 5 games like they had in the season opener against Miami. But this is a different Florida team than at the start of the season. The start of the season for the Gators, they didn't look good. They should have lost to Kentucky. I don't know that they should have lost to Miami, but they didn't play great. The game against Tennessee was bad. The game against Auburn was bad. A lot of what we're resting the view of the world on the Gators about is a double-digit loss on the road at LSU, a game they certainly competed in hard, but they lost, and this is a chance for both these teams to come into this game, get a top 10 win. It would be Georgia and Florida's second top 10 wins because, when Florida beat Auburn, the Tigers were in the top 10 at that time. So this would be a chance for both these teams to get a good win, but really more than that, to go to Atlanta. Georgia can win this game and still not go to Atlanta. That's not really the case with the Gators. If Florida wins this game, they're going to Atlanta. They would need too much to go wrong for them not to go to Atlanta. It's just not going to happen. So this is, and even if that weren't in, let's just say Tennessee was in total control, which hasn't happened in a long time, or, someone else was in control. It's still your rival. For Georgia, a lot of people view this as the number 1 game. And I think there's plenty of Gators that view this as their number 1 game. I think the older that they are, the more likely that the Gator crowd views this as their, biggest game. Florida State is obviously a huge game for the Gators. I'm sure Tennessee is too. Auburn used to be a huge game for Florida, but that game doesn't get played anymore. But for the Gators, it's the Noles, the Dawgs, and I guess Tennessee and Auburn. They don't play Auburn anymore, and they've dominated Tennessee so much. That rivalry has become embarrassing, frankly, on the Tennessee end. I can't remember the last time Tennessee won back-to-back games against the Gators. They have been dominated in that series, and that's why this game right now, the cocktail party, has been such a big deal, because Georgia and Florida have dominated the East over the championship, the SEC championship era of football. A lot of that was due to Mark Richt. A lot of that was due to Steve Spurrier, but I think, now you're seeing, and Urban Meyer, can't forget Urban Meyer, for God's sakes. There were some Hall of Fame coaches that have been in this game. And now you've seen, since Kirby Smart's arrived at Georgia, they've won it 2 out of the 3 times he's been the head coach. So that matters. I'm going to, if you're on YouTube, I'm going to link today's press conference for Kirby up top. If you're on Twitter, appreciate you being here. Subscribe down below. Tell me what you think. Everybody listening on iTunes, we appreciate you too. We'll see you over on the website, dawgpost.com, dawgpost.com.